Hi, everybody. So we're here again with an emergency podcast, but this time it's not because Sinatra left. It's because the Vancouver Titans completely imploded and basically cut all their players. So we gotta talk about it. Before we get into it, please, if you haven't, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Do all that YouTuber stuff. If you want to see us on social media, hit us up at ScrapyardMedia. Anyway, let's get into it. So today, the Vancouver Titans finally ripped off the Band-Aid that's been sitting around since Janu was officially released a couple days ago, and they basically announced cutting their entire roster. They released a
Yeah.
press release, and I guess just some choice cuts before we get into this. Um, so basically, it goes into they're very excited to start the season. They had like a really nice, I guess, esports training facility done with like a home chef and gaming and fitness areas, and all these resources available.
Therapy, they had like everything available to them to make sure that they had everything that they needed. And then,
Then COVID-19 happened, obviously, and this is sort of where I think the issues start to exasperate. So the Vancouver Titans cut all their players and released Fissure, which I think is kind of funny that like, oh, we mutually parted ways with all our players, and then we cut Fissure. But so COVID-19 happened, and the players wanted to go back to Korea, and this is all from reporting by ESPN Esports. Jacob Wolf wrote a whole story about it, and effectively, the players wanted to return to Korea, and the team was like, sure, you can return to Korea. Like, it's fine. So the players go to Korea, but the team didn't provide a team house or any structural support after that. So it was basically
yeah,
the
they
players.
basically sent them all to their own homes and was like, okay, we'll give you what you need. Make sure that you're here during these times, and we'll go from here. And it kind of comes off in the letter itself that, like, the American staff, the like Vancouver Titan staff that was like maybe from Canada or from just North America, somewhere in general, could have been the United States. It seems like they stayed in the United States because it goes on to say how, the time changes and the time differences really got in the way of things we were trying to do, and like changes and like team bonding things and etc. And I'm like, so you guys just all were like, we'll do it in our own homes.
Yeah, so then, the players were playing from their own homes, but obviously the players supposedly wanted a team house. They wanted to kind of be together to practice. And so with the organization not budging, not wanting to provide a team house or like pay all these extra expenditures, or maybe they just weren't able to find one, and the players probably already low key being fed up, and then COVID-19 just kind of exasperated the process. The players basically held out. We see this in the NFL, we see this in the NBA. Players hold out in their contracts. Usually it's for more pay, but this seems like fairly similar, where they're holding out for like better accommodations. Neither side could reach an agreement apparently, and it was basically like, hey, sorry, thanks for your service, best luck on your future endeavors. And they basically got rid of the entire Runaway roster, and they signed a bunch of new players. I think they're from Second Impact, and
I think something along those lines.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
and
It all came
well,
out on Twitter really fast and quick, and
or
trying to keep
Second
up with
Wind.
it.
My bad. Sorry,
Ah,
we don't really
okay.
watch contenders like that. But Second Wind, and
Yes.
really the prime player from that group that they signed is this dude called Dalton. And if you follow anybody that follows contenders, Dalton is sort of like this wonderkind kind of player, where the same way that we heard about dudes like Yaki all last year, just constantly everybody in contenders is like, oh my god, Yaki is credible, and Sparkle. Dalton is of that same air, where his name is constantly brought up as players that the Overwatch League seemingly missed. So it's really good that he's getting a chance to be in the league, and we can actually see him show his skill set in a pretty strong North American region. But it's a shame that this new roster is coming in off the backs of such a such a horrible mismanagement and PR disaster for the Vancouver
Oh yeah,
Titans.
for sure. Um, and it's just one of those things that I was going to talk about in a in a separate video, but it's all coming to light in the fact that like nothing is happening. So if these things happened during the season, like if we were seeing them live on stage and all that, I don't think that we would have as big of a like community reaction, because it's like, well, for something like this, yes, but like all the littler things, it's like everybody is panicking and being like, oh, the league's dying, this and that, people are leaving left and right. But like last year at this time, when it was this early in the season, like there was people being traded, leaving, retiring, all the same. So when it comes down to it, a whole team got wiped last year too, to bring in a whole Korean team. So it's the exact same kind of thing going into it. It's just because there's absolutely no one stopping us from just sitting on Twitter and seeing all of it happening live, then it all becomes just one big live tweet of panic and, oh my God, here it goes, it's disappearing. And then like it allows smaller groups to kind of just branch off and be like, hey, it's really strange that this person didn't play last week. Do you think something's up? And then it's like, well, yeah, but they also didn't play like one other time because they didn't need this player.
I mean, that's a fair assessment, at least of like people just being bored, because like Carpe didn't play this last week, and you see people be like, oh damn, what's wrong with Carpe? And it's like, shit, they wanted to rest him. But this Vancouver thing is substantially bigger, because you just
definitely.
You don't see this level of mismanagement very often. It's like the Cleveland Browns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Cleveland sports in general, and that's kind of it, But the Vancouver Titans really messed this up, and there's a lot of really good pieces talking about the issues that the Vancouver Titans had, I guess, going forward. Bonnie from the Overwatch League is a way better writer than I will ever be, and Bonnie wrote this piece just detailing the history of Runaway as a roster and why the players were so beloved. And Emily Rand wrote a very informative piece on ESPN talking about the Vancouver Titans' failure to market this Runaway squad. And we've talked about this before, that Vancouver Titans aren't bad. Like the Runaway team, all Hawksall, Bumper, all them cats, they're not like bad people. They're actually really just like cool dudes, and
they seem incredibly nice,
yeah.
And they got the villain persona coming into last season because they were like the top team, and then like they played, I think, the opening weekend and completely smashed people, and it just became this like constantly every weekend that they would just, especially if they played 2 or 3 times a weekend, like you would see them just beat the shit out of people, and then it's like, oh no, here they come. And I remember the moment like after the season 1 playoffs against the Shock, where it was like suddenly they're the bad guys, and I think that's like horrible marketing, because then it's just like the Vancouver team in general is like the heel.
Well, also, that's just not who they necessarily are. If you look at Runaway, like when we did that look back of Runaway, they had like an entire arena of fans crying, and Wolf was losing his mind, and
they were very Shanghai when they finally won.
Yeah,
it was something like that.
And so now they come into the Overwatch League as the Vancouver Titans, and I totally understand wanting to carve your own identity instead of just being, oh, we're Runaway 2.0. But there were some really interesting quotes in Emily's piece where, and I think we talked about this last week, but Vancouver didn't have an English translator on their team. And so these players were moved.
I don't think we talked about this.
Yeah,
actually,
and so these players were moved halfway across the world to live in another country, and weren't given the kind of support to help them just navigate the media landscape and stuff. And I believe it was Bonnie that said that Somin Soo loved to get interviewed, but they weren't able to be interviewed until stage 3 of last year. And stage 3 of last year is well after this villain narrative, this like quiet assassins narrative that follow the Vancouver Titans sprung forth. And so they were brought halfway across the world, weren't able to do media, weren't able to connect with English-speaking fans, and there was a giant disconnect between the people that came in just watching Overwatch League and the people that watched Contenders. And it's a real shame because, Emily I believe it was Emily, compared it to New York Excelsior, who came over and they have an all Korean team, but they immediately started doing English press. They started doing subtitled videos. They have a really good media presence, and it makes you know who the players are and care about them. Like Jonak got that MVP in part because he was super marketable. And you
Yeah.
look at the Vancouver Titans, and they ended last season with a really confused identity because in one hand, they're this runaway squad that's so beloved, and you look at all these players, and it's like, I really like these dudes. But then you have this weird Vancouver Titans, like, non-identity of just, like, these quiet Korean players from a faraway land came over to Overwatch League and dominated everybody in the first year. It's very incongruent to what they wanted to do with the team.
Yeah, and you could notice in like interviews and stuff, especially post-game interviews when it was, you know, any of the my well-missed Danny's and etc. I very much miss seeing their smiling faces, but it was those moments where after they got to do these like interviews where they would translate, but like you could see with New York when Danny would interview the post-game interviews, you could see that they could kind of understand what he was saying when he was doing the English part before he asked it in Korean. But with the Titans, it just seemed they were like completely lost the entire time, which made them look very just stoic and very like hard. But then by the end of the season, when they like when Shock became this like powerhouse and they became the literal hero of the league, they got, you know, the cape, the whole 9 yards. Titans stopped looking like a villain, and it was especially after the champs, the grand finals, where I'm like, this is a team that looks just like a bunch of puppies that got kicked. Because they like came out and they showed all this personality for the first time in like so long, and then like they already had the villain narrative, so like nobody in the crowd really reacted in a positive light. Like Bumper comes out and bangs his chest, it doesn't come off as a like I'm copying Winston, I'm being funny, I'm being cute. It's like I'm having fun with it. It comes off like a darker kind of cloud, which I think is really, it really sucks for them because they were a team where I saw today when they announced in the comments, like the thread, the Twitter thread, about how Somansu said this team will do great things if we just stay together. And that was like a quote of his. And like that's like the saddest thing because this team now is like split up. They could go 12 different ways. They can go to so many different teams, and they'll never get that those last moments of being in a team house together. And that's what's really shitty. And there's so much that like just comes off as like utter like PR bullshit in that letter that it's like, you guys fucked up, but you're kind of putting it on the players that they were just being too difficult. It has that air of like, well, we tried to do it. We had this whole thing set up. And it's like, well, how did that fall through if you had it set up? You had a house ready. Where did the difference?
Well,
where did that fall through?
There is something to, I would say, actually it being just really hard to find like a team house to lease or something. Like I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you look at a lot of the, you know, some of the points that people bring up, it's that a lot of these teams were able, like, already had like footholds in Korea and already sort of knew how the market went there and stuff. But the Vancouver Titans organization is like all Canadian or something, so they don't necessarily have those footholds. So like I understand that. I don't think the organization was completely at fault because I do think that at a certain point it's like, well, shit, like we can't. So either you're gonna play or we're gonna cut you, and they just came to that agreement. But also, I do tend and probably will always side with the players in these type of situations because
it's their livelihood. Like,
yeah, and realistically,
an organization can cut anybody at any time and then it's just over. But the players, it's like they forget. It comes off like
the
organization
player
forgets them. They are human. They still have to do this for their job.
Yeah, a player should look out for themselves at all times. And if all these stories are true about the lack of like a translator and the team actually just kind of being like, well, we can't find a place for you guys now that you're back in Korea, and you know maybe the moves of Bumper getting fired and Tizzy getting fired added things up, I can totally understand the players being like, this organization doesn't care about our success. And it's clear that the Vancouver Titans players are, one, great, and two,
incredibly
yeah,
talented.
and are totally capable of winning a championship. And if you're a great player and you're looking at the organization and you're seeing that they're the ones holding you back, then I totally understand wanting to hold out and improve your situation. And I get that. And it's also a bad look for Vancouver because they're not the only team that had to like suddenly relocate.
Yeah,
All the Chinese teams had to move to Korea and figure things out. London
they
had
had.
London had to move to Korea. New York had to move to Korea and figure things out. Seoul had to shift everything and figure things out. And they did. And even if it does take a long time, which it might, London was able to take like 3 weeks off of playing to figure their situation out, and they're playing this coming week.
I mean, the Shock
Maybe
even had
Vancouver
the
had to sit out
opportunity.
of May and maybe make up some games in June or something. Like, they're not the only team that had to suddenly relocate to Korea from where you were. And so it's a bad look that all these other teams in the Asian region figured it out, but Vancouver Titans couldn't. That's probably the worst look and the worst indictment on them as like an
Yeah, and I mean,
organization.
even the Shock, they had spent right before everything, everything hit the fan. I remember them posting that they were doing another couple of days boot camp in Korea, which doesn't mean it's not a boot camp, but if they were also thinking about, because they had a majority Korean roster, to stay in Korea, it wouldn't have surprised me if that was actually what they were doing there, and then decided to just release the spot in LA, because I'm pretty sure they're still in their like the Shock home down in LA. And it's just one of those moments where it's just like, not only did you have like several weeks to figure this out, like the league even added an extra week on to when they were supposed to start playing. Like, it was supposed to start up like they had like the 2 weeks leading up to the thing, and that's when things started getting iffy, and stuff started getting canceled, so they might as well start thinking about like finding some place to go. And then they had the 1 week while everybody, like, as the Overwatch League, as in the casters and etc., had to get ready. And then they had an extra week because like LA had like an extra weekend because LA closed down and they couldn't even have Zoe and Ryan Force and them in the same like little building together.
Yeah,
So
they
they
had
all got
ample
sent
time to
home.
figure things out.
They had so much time. And it's just ridiculous to think that, like, yeah, sure, maybe you couldn't keep the, like, because it was a partner deal with where you were going to be performing, you couldn't have kept that location, but the concept still comes to it where it's like, okay, you had the money into this thing. If you got it, like, back, why don't you put that into getting them a team house? You had so much time between when the games got canceled to when the first game started getting played again, before even Titans came back into the games.
Yeah,
They had
and
so much
and I
time.
mean, you look at like their press release, and there's like a lot of like just like stupid PR bullshit, like, oh, the players weren't able to communicate with the local fan base. Like, yeah, because everybody's on quarantine. Like, what are they gonna go do, like meet and greets and stuff? Like, yeah, and also like if you really cared that much, you would have had like a translator figured out in stage
You would
one and
have
two.
started putting uploads
Yeah,
on like
like there's some
YouTube.
it's like some
Like there's
stupid
so many
PR shit. Yeah,
there's so many channels right now that are like the team channels where they're doing like, oh, here we are at home. Here's what we're doing right now. Here's some of our old games with our comms. I'm pretty sure, like,
Houston's been doing that too,
yeah,
and it's
it's like
so there's
you could
things you
do
can
this.
do, and so like there's like you look at that press release and it's clear like, all right, there's like a lot of PR bullshit, but and you also look and it's like, I guarantee in like 3 days this is going to be like a different situation, or in a week more things are going to come out. And so like if you just look at all the players that got released, the only two players that basically like we know aren't gonna be coming back anytime soon are Ryu Jae-hong and Fissure. They both said like they're taking a break, which like totally do it. But they both like aren't like committed to retiring. They pretty much said like, all right, we're taking a break. Jae-hong made it very clear that he's not retiring. So we're basically left with like the entire rest of the team that's
The
looking for
actual
a team.
Runaways.
Yeah, so like Slime, Twilight made a looking for team post. Hoxall, Somansu's looking out there. I'm sure Stitch is looking out there. Janu probably already has a new team by now. And you just look at like all these players, and I talked about this with Ethan in the interview that is also on this YouTube channel, and it was like right after the news broke, and he made a really good point that there's not a lot of space out there for these players to land. A lot of the Asian region teams do have pretty close to full rosters, and so it's something that I don't think is going to be as easy as like, oh, Hoxell's going to the Spark. Oh, yeah, we've always wanted that. I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think
it's not going to be as easy as if it was like normal times and like
I think
this happened.
like if this happened in the off season, it makes sense. But right now, there's a lot of teams that seem content with what they have. But there are some interesting things that do kind of arise out of this, specifically with the Guangzhou Charge. Also the topic of my Ethan interview. But with the Charge,
they did lose
Neptuno
too.
Neptuno's gone because of visa issues, and Nero's about to be gone because of visa issues. So that leaves up a spot where if you did want to mess around and get a Hoxall to kind of fill out that like flexible DPS position, then you might be able to throw some cash at him. If you need to fill out like this Neptuno role because maybe you want somebody there to fill in for Shara if need be, then Slime's out there. You might be able to throw some money to him. So there's things that can happen, and it just really comes down to, can these teams make the proper moves? Hangzhou is a really interesting case because a lot of people are dreaming about Hoxall joining Hangzhou because they haven't ever really had like a elite flex DPS, but they still have Crystal on the roster. And as far as we know, Crystal is still signed to the team. So Crystal fills up that roster spot they would use for Hoxall. So it's a real weird question, and since they parted ways, the Vancouver Titans have no trade leverage. So it's not like they could have traded Hoxall for so-and-so and so-and-so. They're all gone. So they're all free agents. And I think maybe this is just like my NBA brain going, and things are different in the Overwatch League, but they had to have like shopped some of these players out for trade. Like, you let them go for nothing and you pick up a solid roster. Like, this Contenders team is not bad. Everybody that knows Contenders is expecting them to do good, and they're probably going to beat the Justice this weekend anyway. So, but if you look at things, my basketball brain is like, I don't know how these business things go in Overwatch League. I'm not literally in the league, but damn, like, you couldn't trade Hoxall for something? You couldn't trade Hoxall for some cash? You couldn't trade him for, Crystal, who's sitting on the bench, or maybe, like, Adara? You couldn't trade... you couldn't trade these dudes? It's really weird. And maybe that's just how contracts work, and maybe just how the Overwatch League is right now. Maybe trades aren't necessarily, like, all the teams agreed, like, hey, let's not trade people. Like, I don't know, but that's definitely a question of, damn, you let these people go for nothing? Like, I would be on that NBA 2K trade machine being like, what can I get for Hoxall? What can I get for Somansu? Because teams would probably, like, trade everything to get a player as elite as Hoxall.
Well, we can hope that, like, the teams that we know that are mostly all Korean rosters that went back to Korea, like London and New York, that maybe they have some spots that they could take some of these players in as well. Because I think Janu would do really well in New York. And then, et cetera and et cetera. I'm hoping that it's not just that they get stuck getting put onto, like, a Chinese team and, like, then be benched because, they already have
these players are going to start anyway. Like, even if Janu went to New York, like, he's going to split time with Hotba, but, like, New York's never going to sign any of these dudes because New York doesn't like having backups. Unless it's a DPS player, they're not going to sign him. So they're not going to sign Slime or Twilight because they refuse to have a backup for Animo and Jonak. Like, that's just the thing.
That is true.
But I agree. Like, you just look at the landscape of the league, and it's just like a weird position for dudes like Twilight and Slime, and like, where are they going to play? Where are they going to go? Like, clearly they're in the Asian region, so Asian region makes most sense. But if you look at the teams that actually, like, need their services, they're all in NA. It's a team like Florida that could really use a dude like Slime next to Gangnam Jin. It's a
Oh
team
yeah.
it's a team like Houston that could totally use an elite DPS like even Sominsu. Like they could totally use a guy like Sominsu. Even if Hoxell's like the best option. There are a lot of teams out there that really need them, but they're not in the Asian region. And if they're committed to staying in Korea, their best bet is to sign with the Korean team, with the Asian region team, because they don't want to be like, what was it, Felder playing on 200 ping this week for Paris Eternal? Like, I don't think they want to do that, playing on shitty internet connections because they're hundreds of miles away. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure they would just rather play like normal ping. So the options are super limited. This market is really weird in terms of free agent signing. So I don't think we're gonna see any of the Vancouver Titans dudes for at least like 3 weeks. Like I can't imagine like these deals happen fast.
Yeah, it's going to be incredibly unfortunate that we only got so little time with these players before they end up being split apart. Like I said, it's very unfortunate because this team had so much history, and we talk a lot about how we don't really care about going into the past, but since we started doing those lookbacks and thinking about Runaway and where it came from, and then even going back into like the Apex games, it's just, this is a team that had so much and such a big group of fans in Korea that it's so unfortunate that like they got screwed over because of so many different things. That's like, who's to blame?
Yeah. So anyway, that's just kind of what went down today. Shout out to Vancouver for fucking things up. Um,
Woo!
and yeah, so I mean, we have another video. We have an interview with Ethan. I think I'll put it like here or there. I'm not really good at this YouTube thing, so I'll know where to like I should put it.
The little icons on
Yeah,
this side of
it'll
the
it'll be
screen.
it'll be here in one of these corners. So click on that. It's a really good interview with Ethan Brunestor. He covered the Guangzhou Charge for the Game House. Really into it, Overwatch writer. We talk about the Washington homestands. We talk about the Guangzhou Charge. We talk about this crazy shit that's happening right now. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. I don't think we're like big enough to tell you to press the bell, so we're not going to do that. But yeah, Taylor, say the outro thing.
The world could always use more heroes.